there were numerous attempts to kill Kennedy, and many of them involved an Oswald double or Oswald plant. There was an attempt in Chicago, for instance, when Kennedy was going to go in October to the Army-Navy game, and he got sick. And they arrested a guy named Thomas Arthur Valley, who's a dead ringer for Oswald, and they stepped in at that point because they were afraid of compromising the operation. They arrested him on a traffic charge after they had abandoned the operation. And Daniel Groth, who was posing as a member of the Chicago Police Department but was actually a member of military intelligence, went into the situation and got Valley out. Groth is the one who years later, in the same capacity, led the police attack on Mark Clark and Fred Hampton of the Black Panther Party, in which 400 police rounds went in and about 4 or 5 rounds came out, and the leadership of the party there was assassinated. So these people moved through and could have been compromised or put around, but I don't know either of those two stories. Do you know any Oswald stories from Canada?
Well, what about San Antonio? There was supposedly also an Oswald clone if the assassination had been moved to San Antonio, and I believe it was it Lifton? Lifton and Josiah Thompson, I think it was, had located this person, and they went up to his door, knocked on the door, and they wanted to talk to him about a murder he was almost involved in. And the fellow said, "Which murder is that?" And they said, "The murder of John F. Kennedy." And the fellow said, "I don't ever want to discuss that case." Shut the door, and that was the last. But to this day, neither Thompson nor Lifton will divulge this person's identity or his address. But they obviously found that there were these Oswald-like plants all over the place.
In fact, I met one of them when Mae Brussel first came to the University of Dayton at my urging, and got the school to pay her way and give her a little money for her work. He followed us out of the lecture hall and didn't approach us until we were well down the street on the way home, ran up under a streetlight, said, "Mae, don't you know who I am?" And she turned around and said, "You look like Lee Harvey Oswald." And I looked at the guy, and he very much resembled him, the same kind of build and everything, the facial features. And he looked down at his feet, and he said, "A lot of people tell me that." And he said, "I'm Don Norton." And she said, "Oh, Don, this is John Judge, and Don lives in Akron, and he came down here just to hear the lecture, and he's the only person in the country that sends me money to do my research." The guy looks down at his feet again, and he said, "That's my conscience money." I said, "Why don't you come on over to the house?" So we walked home with him, and he sat and talked to Mae and I, and all he would say, started into this rap about Marxism, and he wouldn't get off of it, and he wouldn't ask a question, he wouldn't talk about the assassination or anything else. He kept talking about class and all these different things. And Mae said, "Well, I'm going to bed." And I offered him some of my research and said I'd be willing to send him more through the mail. He said, "Send it general delivery, Akron, Ohio, Don Norton." Wouldn't give me a street address, and he left. And the next day was the day that Mae told me the story about Marguerite Oswald, and she said, "Do you think that was Oswald?" And I said, "Well, he sure as hell looked like Oswald, but how can you ask me if it's Oswald? Oswald's dead." And she said, "That isn't what his mother told me," and told me that piece of the story. And then she said, I'm gonna go back and check this guy's signature, because Don Norton had been writing to her, and she has a whole collection of Oswald signatures. She wanted to compare the handwriting. And so she went back, and none of the letters from Norton had a signature. They'd all been typed. And we kept trying to get in touch with this guy. I guess he basically faded after that point, but housemates that I was with, I said, "You know, this guy really looked like Oswald." And they said, "Oh, you're crazy." And I said, "You don't read the commission. You don't look at the pictures." This was the Oswald from Russia, the one that was in the Soviet Union. It's on the passport photo. My housemates and I went to see Executive Action, early fictionalized documentary on the multiple shots in the Kennedy assassination and the hit. In there, they show how conspirators might have framed Oswald, and they use actual photographs and documents from the commission. Up comes the photograph from the passport of Oswald. One woman grabs my arm and says, "Oh my God," and the woman behind says, "It's him." Because then they could recognize him. They'd seen a picture of the real Oswald, and they remembered Don Norton when he came to the house. The name Don Norton is in the front of a book called The Kennedy Conspiracy by Paris Flamand, He's one of a number of people that's named as in a rogue gallery in front of the book, and he's specifically an individual that's supposed to have carried money for the mafia from New Orleans up to the Toronto syndicate and then back down into the United States, money on Kennedy's head, and from Marcello and the elements down there. And so he was a courier, and whether this guy was just using the name Don Norton was the real Oswald, or whether Don Norton was one of the doubles, we don't know. But there are many, many Oswald doubles and Oswalds in many situations, and it's like anything else. Just like last night, Hinckley had a double named Richardson. They have to have more than one. The Latin with the pencil-thin mustache that was seen with the woman in the polka dot dress, who had been with Sirhan in the hours before the shooting, and both of them had seen his company for days before, ran from the Ambassador Hotel clapping their hands with glee. We got him, we got Bobby, we got him. After the shooting, this pencil-thin Latin is in the final version of the film Second Gun by Ted Chirac. You can see him right behind Kennedy, and when Kennedy's staff makes the decision about which way he's going out the door through the pantry, this guy gives a little signal over his head. He moves his eyes from left to right and lets them know, Team A over there. If Kennedy turns the other way, there's got to be a Sirhan over here who's got the same background, the same crazy stuff, you know, like Richardson writes letters to Jodie Foster, the same cover story. You go into these guys' rooms, they've got Mein Kampf on one shelf and they've got Das Kapital on the other. I mean, you know, and you know, somebody even wrote, when Oswald moved to New Orleans, they wrote to the FBI because they were concerned that this neighbor there, as Oswald, had all these Marxist books and was reading Karl Marx, and Hoover wrote back and said, he's okay, leave him alone. I mean, the connection goes so far back that when I looked into the organized crime studies that involved Sam Giancana, who was one of the mobsters hired by Operation 40 to kill Castro and then Kennedy, Giancana was the leader of the waste handlers union, and Bobby Kennedy was going after him, and after other people that he worked with. He refused to testify. They put him in prison for contempt. They moved to take his second in command there in Chicago, Jacob Rubenstein, Jack Ruby. A letter is in the records of the Crime Commission for those years from Richard Nixon in the White House, who was vice president then, saying, don't subpoena this individual. He had been working directly for the FBI and for Nixon in the White House, and Nixon covered Ruby in those years all the way back to the 50s. So, you know, they plan the people and the scenarios. They can use them over and over again because it works, and most of us haven't figured it out yet.